I think it's time to move on to the next call. And oh, we have a return caller. Let's talk to Joe in Kansas. Joe, you're live with Eric.
Hi, Eric.
Hi. Give me just a second because I'm doing this all by myself. I need to fill out your name in
Sure.
in the lower third. That way people will know who's calling. Okay, there we go. Hi, Joe.
Good morning, Eric.
Good morning. Good morning. So you wanted to continue our conversation and dive into deism. Is that right?
Yeah, you had asked me to call back.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you calling back. I've got to admit, Joe, I'm having trouble remembering our conversation. Could you fill me in the colors in?
It was the last time I had called, it was kind of a more just off the top of the head conversation. It was my my take on astrology and some of the more, I suppose, what you would mark as some of the more harmless, generally speaking, at least, forms of, paranormal or supernatural beliefs, and comparisons of that to some of the more, directly harmful forms of belief, fundamentalist Christianity, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and also your Heaven's Gate types, like just
right.
Makes sense. Okay, so how did we get to deism?
Deism is one of the very first times I called in. In fact, I think the very first time I called in was the discussion on deism, and I don't remember exactly what was going on, but that was another case where it was just you. V was not present for that conversation.
Oh man.
And in talking about deism, you had asked me, because I had to clarify on a couple things. You asked me if, describing like the four fundamental forces, the laws of physics, that kind of stuff, how there isn't really a lever attached to those things, I think was how you described it, which is a great way to describe it.
Cheers.
And that is not something that I believe in. It's as a deist, I suppose it was the way I described it was the way I rationalize my deism is that currently, in the best known astrophysics, the explanation for how the universe began is the Big Bang, 14.7 billion years ago. But when describing the Big Bang, it's normally referred to that the Big Bang sprang from the point of singularity, the infinitesimally tiny point of all matter and energy condensed into one tiny dot.
Mm-hmm.
And but then it almost becomes paradoxical, because the understanding is that time and space came into existence at the moment of the Big Bang. That was T=1 was the Big Bang. So that then means that necessarily the singularity never had a time or a space where it existed.
Isn't that weird? I've heard different views on it, and it makes my brain very wobbly if I think about it too hard. But that sounds like you might be describing a God of the gaps argument. Are you trying to say that there's a God in there somewhere that we just can't see?
Yes, and that's, I've heard that more times than I care to admit. And the thing is, I am not, I am not all that well versed in physics, and I'm perfectly fine admitting that. And in all honesty, if Albert Einstein appeared and tried to teach me physics, he wouldn't have much luck either. Like,
hey, don't.
It's not something that my brain does well with.
Oh, don't give up on yourself. Let me tell you something. I have felt the same way about math my entire life. I've always been awful at math. But if you look at it through a lens that you do like it with, like for me, I'm a philosophy geek. I love philosophy. And I've been reading a book called The Philosophy of Mathematics. And it is completely like shifting my view of what it means to exist. And how people have kind of changed throughout the ages and how that kind of interacts with our ideas of numbers. It's a really, really fascinating read. But there's no way you could have convinced me that I would have gotten those concepts. You can do it. You just got to find where it applies. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. People don't want to look at, wavelengths until they get into electronics,
Right.
And it just happens that way. But okay, so let's get on to the deism piece. So it sounds like you call yourself a deist, but it's very tenuous. Because
to a point, it's
so is it useful for you to think that there's some greater power that created everything, or it like why?
Not really.
Okay.
It's like as you pointed out, it does come awful close to the God of the Gaps argument. And the thing is, regarding that description of the Big Bang and the kind of strange paradox of, well, if the Big Bang caused everything, then that means almost necessarily the Big Bang sprang from something, but the concept of before doesn't make sense. And it says if someone could, I don't know, maybe in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, if something else is discovered regarding the earliest moments of the universe, if something can be learned about that to say that, I don't know. I'm just kind of snowballing here.
Yeah,
but
you're spitballing. Yeah, I get it. I guess I just, what I think I'm doing, Joe? I think I am taking my experience and trying to place it onto you, and that's not fair.
Sure.
And so,
it's the thing. And here's the thing. It is a little tenuous. Well, it's very tenuous because if that's the one part that I have trouble rationalizing. So yes, I apply God to that, to that strange paradox in order to make it make sense in my brain.
Well,
and if someone can refute that paradox for me, I will be an atheist that day.
Well, here's that is definitely an interesting barrier that you are not the only person to say. It's just, it's interesting to me that you wouldn't look at that and say you're agnostic, that it's unknowable, but to make the claim that there's definitely some kind of deity. And I'll tell you that for me, in my experience, and for lots of people that I've spoken to kind of during the process of deconversion, I didn't want to get rid of my God belief. I didn't want to get rid of this higher power because there are so many implications. I was staving off this view into the abyss of nihilism of like, okay, if there's nothing there, then what about, ideas of purpose and meaning, and how do those even make sense in the universe without some kind of thing bigger than me? How can I rationalize morality and ethics if there's not some lawgiver who's handing them down to me? And so because of that, I started like shifting my definition of a God so that God could still exist as a, rationally to me, right? I'm using the word rational. It made sense in the context of my mind, and my understanding of the world. So it was rational to me. Was it rational to others? No. But all of a sudden, my God became a much more forgiving person. My God became somebody who wouldn't send anyone to hell, that hell is just a bad idea that people made up, that God
Right.
is much more loving towards gay people, that God is,
Right.
and I started like removing pieces, a piece at a time, until I got to a point.
That's actually not something that bothers me really, because I know that gets into, you know, cherry picking arguments. But
well, I mean, I'm not trying to justify the argument as much as I am trying to at least share that along that process, I hit a point that's very similar to where you're at. And so what was what was a big thing for me was I realized the reason I was holding on to it wasn't because it itself was convincing, but because it prevented me from having to do a lot more very intense thinking that I wasn't ready for. I don't know if that's the case for you, but recognizing that in myself and seeing that,
I guess
it's really rough.
Deism. The thing about deism for me is I was raised in, my immediate family we are not a religious group of people. It's I grew up in a really tiny town of like 500 people, and up until I was 12, I think, we had a United Methodist church that that we went to, and it was and because of how small that town was, everybody knew everybody, and it was a church, but it was also kind of just the community center.
Yeah,
and
in small communities, that definitely, yeah,
right. And being that this was Methodism, it was very low key. You know, there wasn't a lot of fire and brimstone talk, and in any of the sermons that I can recall from that church. And then eventually it was just something that I wasn't really super interested in going to anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And we stopped going. And then as YouTube happened, I kind of discovered the atheist experience. I got a buddy who was also having kind of like I hesitate to use the phrase crisis of faith, but
that is such deeply ingrained Christianese. Isn't it funny though? Like crisis of faith is the word that we reach for, but like you recognize all the baggage that's inside of it. That all of a sudden, asking questions is somehow a crisis. No, you're. I get it. Yeah, they were questioning, and it probably felt like a crisis to them.
And he, after he started exploring, he went from like evangelical Christianity to full blown atheism in like record time, it seems like. And so then once he said, I am an atheist, then he and I would discuss, because I wasn't super like, I didn't have a religion.
Joe, I'm kind of losing you. It sounds like you're moving away from the mic, and I'm having to kind of lean in a bit, even though that's not helping. But like that's my reaction. Are you kind of moving away from the phone?
I don't think so. Is this any better?
It is. I'm just going to bump your volume up a bit as well. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. It was, but yeah, he went full atheist, I guess, and
kind of started challenging you on and having conversations with you that you were maybe having fun sparring.
Not really, because I had already stopped going to church, and it just wasn't. I was non-religious. I still believed in God, but it wasn't just. I didn't have any label. And,
so I call that apatheism.
Sure.
When it's just
that'd be pretty close.
Yeah, it just stops being the most important thing,
right?
Or even the second or 20th most important thing. Yeah.
And he was way more into the kind of the research that he was doing than I was. And so as we would talk and as we would discuss, he would bring up all these different things he was learning about. And he told me, and we were both, to clarify here, we were both like 14 or 15 while all of these conversations were going on.
What an age for that. Okay.
And so he discovered deism, or we were talking one time and he mentioned deism, and I said, I don't even know what that is. And he said, it's essentially the belief that, God created the universe, or however you want to describe, the beginning, but no longer interferes with it, no longer has anything to do with it whatsoever.
Yeah, just kind of fucked off.
And to me, at that point, that made complete sense.
And how old are you now?
I am 32.
Okay. So from 14 to 32, it kind of holding that deism label sounds like it's
sure.
Okay.
And things have fluctuated. Like I used to believe in what my dad used to call divine evolution, which is that evolution was empowered / controlled by some divine being.
Oh yeah, God is in there controlling all of the mutations that happen from.
Right.
Yeah.
I used to believe that. Don't believe that anymore. So yeah, things have switched and changed. Anything regarding the afterlife is something that I am flat out agnostic on.
Okay.
And that's actually something that I get kind of annoyed by certain atheists who I've interacted with. People who are Gnostic in their belief of I know there's no afterlife, and I just want to be like, do you?
Well, so I understand the
last time I checked, no one has,
So here's a funny thing. If Genetically Modified Skeptic actually put out a video talking about hell yesterday, I think, and kind of going over the history of how that evolved, I would recommend looking into it, because kind of seeing how some of these ideas found their way into our cultural consciousness, and then recognizing that it's not somehow built in, makes it feel like less likely, because it just, you kind of recognize it for the story that it is.
Sure.
And then it follows just the same as any other supernatural claim. But Joe, while I could talk to you for a while, I do have a bunch of callers on the line.
I don't want to, I realize I'm probably taking up a bit of time.
That's okay. I really don't know how to move forward from here. And I don't think you necessarily have to. But I would challenge you to see if, it sounds like you're moving towards just the agnostic. It is unknowable. And even in your case about talking about deism, it sounds like you're more of an agnostic, at least for my definition, that coming to a conclusion about a God is not possible. And in fact, there are a lot of atheists who would call themselves that same thing. And then they would go, okay, well, when it comes to a testable claim, I know that God claim isn't true. But I couldn't say the same for all God claims. And actually, that's where I'm at too. But because generally the people I'm talking to are ones who are holding up the Bible, and saying, this is the God I believe in, I find functionally calling myself an atheist because I don't believe that claim works.
Right. It's the closest that you can come to without getting into minutia.
Yeah. It's the most functional, at least for me.
Right.
But that's a pragmatic choice. Either way, Joe, thank you for calling in, and thank you for just, I don't know, man, challenging yourself. Like, that's awesome. And I'm glad to hear it.
Yep. Thanks for taking my call, Eric.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
It's so interesting, you guys, when people are going through, questioning the world around them. It feels like we all need to invent disbelief if we grow up in an environment where that's just the norm. And it's such a wild and lonely experience. I'm really, really glad that there are online communities that people can be a part of, because that was not always the case. That was not always the case.